My name is Deb Peterman. I'm with the Center for Disability Empowerment. I am a transition coordinator and community connector. The Center for Disability Empowerment is very excited tonight to share what we do and a grant that we're working with, and we have an amazing author that we're sharing with you tonight. As you look at your screen, we have several logos on here. Of course, you see the Center for Disability Empowerment. We also see the chart of the life course, which are life course tools. And this presentation is part of a grant from the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities, and the grant is called the Ohio Family Network. And who we are as the Center for Disability Empowerment, we are a 501c3 non-residential center for independent living that is driven by choice and direction of people with disabilities. We offer 5 core services: information referral, independent living skills, training and community connections, advocacy, that's self and systems advocacy, transition services, empower youth for high school students, and transitions from nursing homes with community supports for people with disabilities. We have ADA compliance support, and we also offer Ohio Personal Care Assistance Program, otherwise known as PCA, and employment services. With this grant, the focus is using a chart in the life course tool. We are going to be talking about the trajectory, and specifically the trajectory towards a good life. So we all know right here, the beginning of the trajectory is where we are now, and we all hope to go and make choices towards a good life. We also know that this changes through the lifespan. So tonight, our focus is on equipping people on how they can support a person with a developmental disability as they mourn. Sometimes we can prepare for the personal loss of a person, and sometimes we cannot. And so we felt it was very important that this presentation be offered. So tonight, I want to tell you that I met Mark Markell, who is our presenter and author, who wrote Helping People with Developmental Disabilities Mourn, Practical Rituals for Caregivers. I found this book probably 2 years ago, and I have always felt it'd be important to find tools to help people with developmental disabilities as they grieve the loss of a loved one, and I mean, even a pet. And so sometimes we just don't know how to help them do that. And sometimes the traditional ways that are offered maybe just don't work for that person. So I just want to give you a personal example. My brother was very attached to my mother. My brother had developmental disabilities. He was nonverbal. He was on the autism spectrum, and he was amazingly attached to my mother. So when he would come and visit, even though growing up, whenever he would lose sight of her, he would panic. And I can remember my mother yelling from the basement, "Rodney, I'm down the basement." He just had to see her. So there was that obsessive thing that he had. And he had that ritual of always looking for her when he was in their home. So as he became an adult, he had moved out, and my parents would have him visit us on the weekends. And of course, my mom would decide to do a load of laundry, and she'd go down the basement, and Rodney would panic. And the same thing, Rodney, I'm down here. And so when my mother passed away, we didn't know what we were going to do. You know, he's nonverbal. His main disability was developmental disability, and he wasn't a reader. His world was pretty small. We just didn't know how we were going to address that. So we thought, okay, we're just going to help him walk through the house and see that she's not there. today I'm hoping that you'll leave with some tools that would be beneficial should you rally around anyone who's mourning, who maybe the traditional ways of grieving aren't for them. And so these tools tonight are hopefully you will find practical, creative, and so I want to introduce you to my new friend, Mark Markel. And Mark, I'm just going to let you take it away.
All right. So thank you, Deb. That was wonderful in terms of the organization you have and all the things that you're doing for people with developmental disabilities and cognitive disabilities. My name is Mark Markel. Excuse me. I am also losing my voice. And so I have 2 bottles of water and a mug of water. So if you see me drinking constantly, that's why. And hopefully my voice will last through the presentation. After my name, I have a CT, and it stands for Certified Thanatologist. And when I tell people that, they usually say, oh, I have no idea what that is. And I say, okay, thanatology is the study of death, dying, and grief. And I am certified through the Association of Death Educators and Counseling. And it was kind of funny. One time I said to a group of participants, I said, does anybody know what CT stands for? And somebody said, yes, I do. And I said, oh, that's great. And I thought, this is wonderful. And he said, that means that you're from Connecticut. And I said, well, no, I would have an MN after my name if I put anything. I do live in Minnesota. I live in Minneapolis with my spouse and my son, who is 19 years old. I am a professor at St. Cloud State University in the Department of Special Education, and I also teach at Worsham College of Mortuary Science. At Worsham College, I teach psychology with an emphasis on funeral service. And that has just been a real joy of mine to work with pre-service funeral directors and to build in a lot of information about grief and loss with the course. I'm licensed in a variety of different areas in Minnesota to teach elementary ed and learning disabilities, mild to moderate, moderate to severe cognitive disabilities. And I'm also a reading specialist. And actually that's what I kind of go back and forth between literacy instruction and grief and loss. And to me, it was a real nice balance over the years. I'm also certified in death and grief studies. I'm a professional developer and a celebrant. And a celebrant, it actually started, I believe, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it was New Zealand, where people wanted somebody to officiate at a funeral or a memorial, but they didn't have a clergy person necessarily. And so then they would look for somebody that could officiate. And now it's becoming more common in the United States. And so I am certified that I could officiate at a funeral or memorial service. And I'm also a trained end-of-life doula. And end-of-life doula is a fairly new vocation, and it's based on birth doulas. And so it has a lot of the same components, but it's just helping someone at the end of their life to reflect back on their life and also kind of go forward and say, what would they like at their funeral or memorial? Would they like a funeral or memorial? And also getting them to decide what they'd like to do in terms of end of life communication with people that are in their lives and what they'd like to say and so on. So that is, all of that has been such a gift to be part of over the years. Tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're going to just talk about a few things to remember when companioning people with cognitive and developmental disabilities through grief. This isn't specifically part of the book that I have, but I think it's a real nice base to kind of say, what are some things that we need to keep in mind? One of the things I always say is that grief is grief, and it is paradoxically universal and individual. And so people with cognitive and developmental disabilities grieve, and they're going to grieve individually. But there are some things to keep in mind that may be helpful for most people as they're going through the grieving process that people without cognitive disabilities may not necessarily need when they're grieving. Though a lot of it is very crossover because it's universal. Grief is universal. Then we're going to talk just a little bit about rituals and what is a ritual, and why rituals that we currently use for leave taking, such as funerals and memorials, and grief rituals after the death, may not work for some people who are more concrete in their thinking. And so we're going to talk about some rituals that are more concrete. And I'll tell you just a little bit about how I came about writing the book, using rituals for people with cognitive and developmental disabilities. And then we're going to look at some examples from the book that I wrote. And for the first 3 examples, I wrote additional stories. The rituals come from my experience working with people with cognitive disabilities, and also in talking with people, and rituals that they've used, and also just creative thinking about what may be helpful to somebody. The thing that I always think with any kind of a ritual or anything that we're not really sure, is this going to work, is this not going to work, is to try it and see if it's helpful. And if it is helpful, continue using it. If it's not helpful, then to try something else. And then we'll end with questions, but I certainly will stop periodically to see if anyone has any questions or concerns, and we will address those things. So these are some things to remember when companioning people with cognitive and developmental disabilities through grief. The term companioning comes from Alan Wolfelt. Alan is he's very well versed in the area of grief and loss, and he runs the Center for Grief and Loss in Colorado. And I have worked with him a number of times by taking courses. He actually wrote the foreword to the book that we'll be talking about tonight. And I also got some ideas from other sources that talk about grief and people with cognitive disabilities, or I adapted it to work more with people with cognitive disabilities. The first thing to do is to be honest and respond as simply and honestly as possible to questions or concerns that people might have. Answer questions directly as possible. Do not make up information. And if you don't know, say, I don't know. I know I've worked with a variety of people that will ask questions that I have no idea. But if I think I can find out the information, I will tell them that. And then the second part of that is, if you say, I don't know, but I'm going to try to find the information out and get back to you, make sure to get back to them, because that is a really important trust building activity, so to speak, that they need to know that you are being trustworthy, and that if you don't know, you're going to tell them, and if you can't find out, you're going to tell them. Sometimes people will not tell the truth to people with cognitive or developmental disabilities because they want to protect them. And the reality is that telling people information that's not true doesn't help them in the long run. And it's difficult. It can be difficult to talk to people about death. But there are stories that I have heard over and over again about parents telling a child or an adult child, or counselors or siblings or care providers saying things like, well, they went on a long trip, or well, they're sleeping. That is not helpful in the long run, because it really impedes the healing process and the grief process for the person. Listen. it's really important to listen immediately after the death, but it's also important to listen weeks and months following. Sometimes the understanding of the permanence of death can come very slowly. And, you know, I think about this for anyone, that death seems so surreal sometimes, that it's like this person was there physically and now they're no longer there physically. And I know the other piece of it is that if, say, a person with a disability lives independently, a group home assisted living, and they don't see the parent, the grandparent, the sibling very often, and then you know, a family member were to die that they don't see very often, it can take a long time to come to terms that this is real, that the person really isn't coming back, that it is a permanent situation. Seek out concrete rituals, and that's what we're going to be talking primarily about tonight. And nonverbal rituals can be really helpful. It can be through music, pictures, art, tactile experiences, smells, whatever it might be that would be helpful to the person who is grieving, who is a more concrete thinker. I will just pause for a moment and tell you that the reason I ended up writing this book in the first place was I have the privilege at St. Cloud State University, where I teach, of being able to teach specialty courses every once in a while. I just need to make a proposal and say, I think this will be a good course. And several times I've taught courses on people with disabilities and grief. And at one point we were talking about rituals, and the students and I were trying to find rituals that might be helpful to people with cognitive disabilities. And we couldn't find things that people would say, yeah, I think that would be helpful. Most of the time they were very abstract, and that is not helpful for somebody who is concrete in their thinking. Please, please, please stay away from euphemisms. And I know we have a lot of euphemisms in our culture for people with who have died. Actually, we have euphemisms for anything we feel uncomfortable with. So for example, saying a person who is dead is asleep will not only mislead the person with a disability, but may also cause them to misunderstand what the dead person, the permanence, that the dead person might wake up. They might think, oh, they're sleeping. Well, when you sleep, you wake up. Individuals can cope with what they know. They can't cope with what they don't know. So I strongly urge people to say the words dead, dying, died, and explain what it means. Now, what you might want to do is use a euphemism, because I know a lot of people use euphemisms. The person passed away, we lost the person. But then for a person who's concrete in their thinking, make sure to couple that with dead, dying, died. So for instance, you might say, oh, we lost your grandmother today. And what that means is that she died. So what dead means and died means is the person's body stops working. It doesn't see, hear, feel, eat, breathe, anything anymore, and that person will never come back. So make it very explicit that the person is gone, the person is the body stopped working, and that they're not coming back. And that can also be helpful if, for instance, if somebody is buried. Let's say that the person's body is in a casket, and the casket is buried in the ground, and somebody who's concrete might say, well, how do they eat down there? You know, aren't they going to be cold? And then you can just repeat what dead means. Oh, they're not going to be cold because they don't feel cold anymore. Their body stopped working, and it'll never start working again. So they don't need to eat. They don't need to be warm. They don't need to hear or see or anything anymore. And sometimes that needs to be repeated several times because it takes a while to understand that. I'm not going to read through all these euphemisms, but I looked online and I found many more than the next two slides, this slide and this slide. Look at all the euphemisms we use. And some of these euphemisms I had never heard of before. But in presenting, most of the time people say, oh yeah, I heard about that. Or I've used that term or whatever. But some of the terms that have been used, cooking for the Kennedys, I had never heard that before. And my students tell me that they hear it quite often, that that is a euphemism for died. Expired, sometimes in hospitals or in clinical settings, they will use the term expired for when a person dies. And what I try to jokingly say is, well, milk expires, people die. And so let's use the actual words. Past, lost. If you use the word lost and you don't explain it, somebody who's concrete in thinking might think that they were misplaced, or that they just were left at a truck stop because they're now lost. So be careful with that. The other thing that I just wanted to say is that sometimes the euphemisms that we use for things that we feel uncomfortable with are also kind of funny. And the reason for that may very well be that it pushes it away even a little bit further, because by using words like his number is up, we don't have to say died. He kicked the oxygen habit. That's kind of funny. And so it might even push it a little bit further away. And again, I just want to reiterate that if you do use euphemisms, make sure to couple that with what that actually means. I did highlight negative patient care outcome. That has been used in some healthcare facilities to talk about death. And the one that I found to be probably the most problematic is that a medical doctor, after doing some surgery on a man, came out and the man had died during the surgery. And he said to the person who died's wife, your husband did not meet his full health potential. Well, on a good day, I couldn't understand what that meant. And she did say, does that mean he died? And the doctor said that would be another way to put it. And so even people that deal with death on a daily basis can feel really uncomfortable with the words dead, dying, and died. Are there any questions before we go on? Sue, are there any questions yet?
No questions in the chat. Emily says it's great so far. I can just real quick story about my own son. We had a dog who we had put down, put to sleep, whatever term you use. I used the term at the time without thinking put to sleep. And
Yeah.
about a year later, my son was having some surgery and I was explaining they were going to put him to sleep.
Oh,
Horrified look on his face, and I didn't connect the two things at all. Wasn't even on my radar anywhere. And then it dawned on me what he was thinking. So we had to take a few steps back, and he knew the dog had died, but it was the term that I used that I shouldn't have used.
Well, you know, this is what I would say. Don't ever beat yourself up.
Oh, no.
Because when people know better, they do better. When,
Right.
you know, now if this were to happen, you probably would say that the dog died and we needed to help the dog die because it was so sick and, you know, whatever it might be. But yeah, that's a great example because people hang on to those terms.
We do have a couple more comments. Emily also said, appreciate directly stating the need to use of word death. And then Cynthia said, what about when the caregiver is also grieving?
Oh, yes. Well, okay. I totally understand that. And sometimes when the care provider is grieving, it seems overwhelming to deal with someone else's grief. One of the things that I came to realize after a short period of time, I volunteer with hospice, and I primarily work in the area of grief and loss and bereavement. And so I typically work with people or companion people who have a disability of some sort, cognitive, developmental. I've worked, companion some people who have schizophrenia and other disabling conditions. And one of the things I realized was, I think one of the best things that I can do is not be part of the family and not be actively grieving myself, because I have then the energy and the ability to companion somebody when they're grieving. Whereas if I was the parent, it would be very different. I want to tell you two quick stories with that. At one point, I was asked to meet with a young girl. She was about 8 years old, and she had a mild disability, a cognitive disability. Her dad had ALS and was at the end of his life. And so I went before she got home from school, and I talked to her mom, and I met her dad, who at that time was nonverbal. And so when I said to the mom, does she know that her dad is at the end of his life? And she said, no, she knows that he's sick. And I said, okay, it's good to know. So when I met her, I said, my name is Mark. And I said, do you know why I might be here? And she said, well, yeah, my dad's dying. And the mom said, how do you know that? And she looked at her mother and she said, Mom, hospice is here. Hospice has been here for a while. How wouldn't I know that? And the mom said, why didn't you ever tell me this, that you knew what was going on? And the little girl said, Mom, if I talked about Dad dying, you would cry. And I don't want to make you cry. Well, as somebody from outside of the family, sometimes I have cried. And that's okay, as long as they're not taking care of me. Because it's sad. It's very sad. And I think that's okay to model what people do when they're sad. But at the same time, I'm not the parent. She doesn't have, the girl could talk to me about all sorts of things. She didn't have to come home with me. I wasn't her dad. I wasn't a relative. And so in that regard, I think it's really helpful to get some people from the outside to also help support not only the person with a disability, but also the care provider. The other quick story was that I had been asked to meet with a young girl who was 14, and her dad was in a home hospice. And so I met with her and her mom beforehand. And her mom had called me the day before, and she said, she's not going to talk to you. She won't talk about her dad dying. And I said, well, it's going to be a really boring half hour or an hour, because we're going to just sit there and look at each other. And she said, well, I just want to let you know, she won't do it. And I said, okay. So the mom and the girl and I met, and we talked for a little bit. And then the mom went out into the living room area, and the girl talked for an hour and 45 minutes. And she told me every fear she had about her dad dying and how difficult it was and so on. So I went out when we were finished talking, and I said to the mom, well, I'm going to leave now. And she said, what were you doing in there so long? And I said, oh, she talked for about an hour and 45 minutes. And the mom was kind of upset. And she said, well, why won't she talk to me? And I said, she doesn't have to go home with me. She doesn't have to care about my emotions. That's why she can talk to me and she can't talk to you. And I said, it's not an insult to you. It's saying, I need to protect you. I feel like I need to protect you. And so therefore, as a child, not saying anything is very common. So one of the things I would say, again, just to recap, is to get somebody outside of the house, outside of the family, to be supportive, whether that's through hospice, or I know the hospice, several hospices in my area, whether a person had a loved one go through their hospice or not, they will work with them, they will companion them, they will counsel them, they will do whatever for people that are bereaved. And in this, with the hospices that I know, they don't charge anything. The other area might be the hospital, might be counseling centers, but it's oftentimes really important to just get outside of the family.
Can you take one more question?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Jennifer asks, how do you explain that heaven is not a place? And if it's not a place, where is the deceased loved one?
That's really interesting. Thank you. I suspect a lot of people are kind of thinking along those same lines. It really depends on what you believe and what the person with the disability believes about an afterlife or not an afterlife. And for some people, heaven is a place. For other people, it's not a place. And so it sounds like you believe that heaven is an existence of some sort, but it's not a place that you go to. Oftentimes, people who are concrete thinking can't abstractly imagine somewhere that is not a place. That, okay, you say the person is in heaven, well, then that's got to be a place. And it could be, and it kind of depends on your comfort level and on the person that you're talking to with a disability, is to talk about say to the person, what do you think heaven is? What does heaven look like? What is there? And get their input as to what they think heaven is, and then go with it. So if they think it's a place, I would just go with it and say it's a place, but it's so far away, and that nobody can ever go there from Earth because it's so far away. I know my dad died when I was 5, and one of the things that we had apparently been told, because my sister and I have talked about this, and we both had the same image of heaven in our heads, and that was, our dad was a carpenter, and we imagined that he went to heaven and he had to go early. He died at age 42. He needed to go early so that he could build a house for us. He could build a cabin and have it all ready so that when we came to heaven, that we would be able to go out. And to me, I, as a 5-year-old who was very concrete in thinking, it never occurred to me whether it was a real place or not a real place. It just was that Daddy was there and he was going to build this house. The other thing that I imagined was there would be bowls of cottage cheese everywhere because I love cottage cheese. And so that was my image of heaven. So I would say, talk about it. Say, what do you think is heaven? And it could be interesting to have a dialogue about that. And they might say to you, well, what do you think is heaven? And you can tell them what you think is heaven. Did that help?
She didn't respond. Hope said using their language, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Deb said, I usually say that we can't see God because he is a spirit. We have a spirit and we can't see it, but it makes us who we are. When we die, our spirit goes to be with God.
And whatever might work for an individual person, I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt here and encourage you to move on, Mark.
Okie dokie, I will move on. Oh, let me go back. A ritual are actions that are symbolically connect us to something meaningful. So we have a lot of rituals in our lives. We have daily rituals, we have rituals to celebrate big events, we have weddings, we have christenings, we have funerals, we have we have all sorts of rituals. A wedding ring has is symbolic, and it can have different symbols for different people, and it depends on the culture and it depends on the person's experience and so on. But oftentimes people with cognitive disabilities who are concrete may not be able to connect that abstract meaning of the symbolism. So when rituals are symbolic, individuals who are concrete have a difficult time. Okay, so one of the things that we can do is try to make things more concrete. As I said, we're going to talk about 5 examples. 3 of them, I wrote additional stories. 2, I did not. And when I'm presenting, I will refer to the person with a cognitive or developmental disability as the individual. Sometimes it's hard to come up with a term that is inclusive and is respectful and doesn't take very many words. Now, up in the corner, you see ritual number 1. This is from the book. So there's a ritual a couple rituals in that says ritual 19. Well, it's like, what happened to all those rituals between 1 and 19? That's from the book. So if you have an opportunity to look at the book and you want to find that ritual, it would be, this ritual would be number 1. It's use of pictures in ritual. And the purpose of this is to show a picture or pictures of a person who has died to the individual and talk. The materials that you need are just a picture or pictures of the person who died. The directions, and the next slide goes on with the directions. You could do the ritual in a place that the individual and the person who died enjoyed being. And that might be really helpful to not only have the picture, but also the surroundings. So you start by having the individual look at the picture and say whatever they're thinking or feeling while looking at the picture. The facilitator can model this. So if the individual is unable or unwilling to speak, the facilitator could speak for the individual, and I'll show you a brief example. The facilitator may say something they remember about the interaction between the individual and the person who died. So for instance, it could be that the facilitator, if the individual doesn't want to talk, or it just is looking at the picture but doesn't talk, the facilitator, whoever that might be, could say, I remember when Carlos, the person who died, helped Jose, the individual, learn how to ride a bike. I also remember them having such a good time riding together. Jose was a bit scared and Carlos was right by Jose to make sure that he was safe. So just, it can be something simple just to remind the person of what, of a memory that had happened. This is a new story and I'll just read through it and then we can see if there are any questions. Earl is a 12-year-old whose best friend is Martin. They go to the same school and often spend evenings together. They play video games, watch movies, and go for walks. Both Earl and Martin have mild cognitive disabilities and autism. One evening, while Earl was reading, his dad received a call from Martin's mother telling him that Martin was walking to the corner store and he was hit by a truck while crossing the street and he died. Earl heard his dad say phrases like, "Oh no, when did it happen? Is there anything we can do?" Earl stopped reading and stood looking at his dad. When the short phone conversation was over, Earl's dad told Earl, Martin was walking to the corner store. It was very slippery on the roads. Sadly, the truck could not stop and it hit Martin when he was crossing the street. The ambulance came right away and they did everything they could. It is so sad, but Martin died. Now I've lost my cursor. Okay. Earl stood for a few seconds staring at his dad, and then he ran to his bedroom, took a picture of Martin that he had on his dresser, and he started to cry very hard. He laid on his bed and he screamed that it couldn't be true, and it wasn't fair that Martin died. After Earl and his family attended Martin's visitation and funeral, Earl did not want to look at pictures or go anywhere that reminded him of Martin. Earl's dad knew that Earl's reaction was typical. Seeing pictures and going places that remind him of Martin was very painful. Several weeks after Martin died, Earl's dad asked Earl if he would like to look at some pictures of Martin and talk about how Earl was feeling. At first, Earl said no to looking at pictures and talking. His dad told Earl that if he wanted to look at pictures at some other time, to tell his dad and they would look at the pictures together. Several days later, Earl told his dad that he would like to look at pictures of Martin and maybe talk. Earl's dad took out some pictures from a drawer. He handed Earl a picture of Martin and Earl at the county fair. They were on a ride and both were smiling. Earl smiled and then he started to cry. "I miss Martin so much, Dad," he said. "He was such a good friend to you, Earl. You both loved going on rides together," Dad responded. After every ride, Martin would say, "That was a real mind blower, bro." Martin and his dad laughed. They continued looking at pictures and talking about Martin. They laughed and they cried. After about 20 minutes, Earl said that he was ready to stop. He told his dad that looking at pictures made him happy and sad. Can we do this again in a few weeks? It's good to remember how much fun Martin and I had, and it's okay to feel sad as long as you're near me. Earl's dad assured Earl that they could look at pictures together again. Any comments?
I would like to share, I have a wonderful student in my Sunday school class who had developmental disabilities. And when my daughter passed away, this young lady was really good friends with my daughter. And I remember her coming to the viewing, and she gave me a hug, and she said, I was so sorry about your daughter. And I reminded her right away how much my daughter loved her and how much she loved singing Disney songs with her and talking about Michael Jackson. And so I was able to bring that positive part of their relationship in the conversation, which brought her a smile. I mean, I think we don't always get it right, but we can try
Right.
and give yourself grace.
And I love that because, the thing that I read this shirt one time, and it said, it was talking about a child, but it said, if you mention my child's name and talk about them, it will make me cry. If you don't, it will break my heart. And so, like you said, we might not always get it right, but to try is so much better than not. That's really good. I had companioned a young boy, and this part of this came from him, is his grandpa died. And at one point I said, what did your grandpa and you do together? And he said, we listened to Kenny Rogers. And I said, wow, that's great. I said, do you have any Kenny Rogers that you'd like to listen to? And he said, yeah, I've got a CD. So he went and got the CD and he played a song. And I said, oh, that's such a nice song. And he said, oh no, we're not done. And he played the entire CD and he said, now we're done. And I said, how are you feeling? And he said, I feel very happy and very sad. And I thought that was so real and absolutely what most people experience. The next ritual is ritual number 7, and that is use of writing in ritual. The individual will write or dictate a letter to or about the person who died. The materials, pretty straightforward, paper and writing utensil or computer. And the directions are that the ritual will be most appropriate for individuals who are able to write, but it can be used for individuals who are unable or unwilling to write. A letter can be written individually with assistance from a facilitator or dictated while the facilitator writes the letter for the individual. Another way to write the letter is to have an outline of the letter with blanks so the individual can just fill in the blanks. So you can do almost anything for a letter, kind of a template. And so this just says, dear blank, I feel blank that you have died. The times I feel saddest are when what I miss most about you is, one thing I want to tell you is love, and then the individual's name. You could tell them that they don't have to fill in every blank. They can fill in more if they want to. So it's very flexible. After the completion of the letter, the individual could read the letter to others. If there are several individuals involved in letter writing, the individuals could take turns reading what they wrote. If the individual is nonverbal or unwilling to read the letter orally, an adult or a volunteer or somebody else could read the letter out loud. If the letter is finished prior to the funeral, the letter could be put into the casket with the body of the person who died, or with the body to be cremated. If it's done before the cremation happens, it can certainly be put in with the body as the body is being cremated. The individual may also want to read the letter in the presence of the body at the funeral. I want to stop there for a moment. I go back and forth about what to say about a person who has died and what to refer to them as. And there's two really different schools of thought, that some people insist that it should be called the body because it's not the person anymore. And other people say it should be you should refer to the body as the person. So they would think that saying your mother, that would be most appropriate, where other people would say, oh, no, it's not your mother, that's the body of your mother. And so that's why I just wanted to pause for a moment. If you're kind of wondering why I wrote the body, I kind of go back and forth about that. If this is something desired by the individual, it could be done prior to the arrival of other mourners, or after other mourners have left the funeral home. It could also be done in the presence of other mourners. Some other options might be for the letter to the person placed at the gravesite, or by the urn, or attached to a helium balloon or balloons, depending on the weight of the letter, and release it into the air. There is also some concerns about helium balloons going into the air, so you can kind of see how you feel about that. But those are all different options that could happen by writing a letter. This is just an example that was filled in. Dear Papa, I am very sad that you died. The times I feel saddest is when I go to sleep. What I miss most about you is you gave hugs. One thing I want to tell you is I love you. Love, Pawn. And this is a story that is not in the book. Janetta is 15 years old, and she has a moderate cognitive disability. She and her grandfather were close. She called her grandfather, Pau Pau. Janetta would go to Pau Pau's house every day after school. Together, they would watch television, they put together puzzles, and Pau Pau was teaching Janetta how to make his secret recipe for cookies. Only Pau Pau knew how to make the cookies, and now he was teaching Janetta. She felt very special. One day, while Janetta was at school, her dad came to her class. Janetta was so happy to see her dad that she ran over and hugged him. When Janetta looked at her dad's face, she saw that her dad had been crying. Why are you sad? Janetta asked. Janetta and her dad went to a quiet table to talk. Janetta, Dad started, Pau Pau had a pain in his chest this morning. He went to the hospital, and the doctors did everything they could to help him. But even with the hard work of the doctors, Pau Pau died. That means his body doesn't work anymore and will never start working again. Janetta started to cry. I don't want him to be dead. I want to go to his house after school. I want to bake cookies with him. I want to tell him I love him. Dad and Janetta hugged for a very long time. When Janetta got home from school, she said to her dad that she was very sad. I have an idea, Dad said. Would you like to write Pau Pau a letter? Excuse me, we can put it in his casket, and it would be with him always. I can help you if you would like. Janetta asked her dad how to spell some words. She wrote, Dear Pau Pau, thank you for teaching me how to make the secret cookies. I remember how to make them. I will only tell Dad in case I forget. I love you and I miss you. Love, Janetta. Janetta put the letter in Pau Pau's casket by his side. She was glad that her letter would be in the casket with him. So again, there's just different ways that the rituals can be used. And then the last one that has a story, and then there's two more, which I think we may get to. This is use of drawing in a ritual. So the purpose is the individual draw a picture about the person who died and have the opportunity to share the picture and memories with others in their life. The materials that you might need are paper, some tools for creating a picture, markers, colored crayons, colored pencils, paint, whatever it might be. Provide the individual an opportunity to draw a picture of the person who has died. The individual may want to draw a picture of an event they enjoyed doing with the person who died, or simply a portrait of the person who died. Even if the individual has limited fine motor skills and is unable to draw with much or any reality, encourage them to draw whatever they remember, even if it's circles and scribbles. They may appear to be random lines to another person, and it may be very significant to the individual drawing. The adult can ask the child or adult to tell me about the drawing. Typically, what I tell people is if somebody draws something and you don't know what it is, rather than guessing or saying, what is that? You just say, tell me about it. Because if you say, what is that? The child or the adult knows that you don't see what they see. But if you say, tell me about that, then they can disclose to you what it is. So the individual can talk about what they have drawn during or after the drawing is complete. If there are several pictures from the same or different individuals, all the pictures can be copied and put into a booklet. The individual can use the booklet to look at or to show others, to give them more opportunity to talk about their mourning. I worked with a young girl at one point in a grief group, and she had a mild cognitive disability. And what we worked on this little workbook, and it said, how did the person you love died? And it was her sister. And she drew it. And I'm just going to use this as a prop. But so she had her little book, and she asked me if she could take it at the end of the session. I said, sure, that would be great. And her mom said that what she did was she would walk up to people and she'd have her book and she'd open it to the page that said, my sister died. And she'd just open it and show it to them. And they'd say, what's that? And she'd say, my sister died. And they'd say, oh no, tell me about that. And then she got to talk about it. So she also got to control when she talked about her sister and when she didn't talk about her sister. That can be, I know when I've done grief groups for people with disabilities or without, one of the activities that they can choose to do if they want to is I get a whole bunch of hearts, wooden hearts, ceramic hearts, and we put a little pin on the back so that they can hook on to their clothes if they want to. And then they just simply put a Band-Aid over their heart. And that's unique enough that people say, what is that? And then the person can say, my heart is broken. Really, what happened? My dad died. Then they can talk about it if they want to. If they don't want to talk about it, they can take it off, and people won't know necessarily what their situation is. So they can have a lot of control with that as well. So a variation of having a child draw a picture is to make a light copy of the picture, the person who died, on a copy machine, or it can be done very easily on a computer, and have the individual either trace or color the picture. This will give the individual a lot of structure while they're drawing or coloring, rather than just free drawing or free coloring, freehand. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. This was by somebody who did not have fine motor control. And again, I would just say, wow, that's got a lot of really cool colors. Tell me about that picture. And then they could share something. Something maybe is a little more, less abstract, less abstract. And then this is actually a picture of my dad. This was his wedding picture, which is, my dad did not like his picture taken. So we don't have a lot of pictures, but I really treasure this one. But if you were going to have a picture like this and the individual wanted to draw a picture of daddy, my daddy, what you could do is just get it really light. So then what would happen is they could just trace over that and it might look something like this. Well, it kind of looks like the photo. It kind of doesn't, but it gives them more structure if that's something that they would like to have. So an example. Oops, excuse me. Youngik is 10 years old. He has autism and mild cognitive disability. His dad has been sick for a long time. His mom told Youngik that his dad has cancer. Youngik knew that when he's sick, he doesn't like much noise. So when he spent time with his dad, he talks quietly and isn't silly. Sometimes they play checkers. One morning, when Youngik woke up, his dad was gone. His grandma was at the house and said that the ambulance came and took his dad to the hospital because his dad was really sick. His mom had driven, it should have been, to the hospital. The ambulance is a special car that can help people when they on their way to the hospital. Youngik called his mom. His mom told Youngik that the hospital was taking good care of his dad. Later that day, Youngik's mom called and told Youngik that his dad was going to die soon and asked if he'd like to see his dad before he died. What is died? Asked Youngik. Died or dead means his body will stop working and will never work again. His mom replied. Youngik said that he would like to see his dad before his dad's body stopped working. When Youngik went into the hospital room, his dad seemed to be sleeping. Even though he will not talk back, you can talk to him, his mom said. Youngik went to the side of the bed. Daddy, I know your body is going to stop working soon. I am going to miss you a lot. Youngik started to cry. Youngik's mom started to cry. Several weeks after the funeral, Youngik told his mom he missed his dad a lot. I do too, his mom replied. I have an idea. Let's draw some pictures of things that we like to do with him. Youngik smiled. I know just what I want to draw, he said. Checkers. Youngik drew a checkerboard and talked about how much fun he had with his dad when they played. Youngik's mother put the picture on the refrigerator. Every time Youngik passed the picture, he smiled, remembering the special times he had with his dad. Any questions, Sue?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. This one is use of Play-Doh in ritual. And I do want to say a couple things as we go through that may be a little problematic for some individuals, but there are ways to work around it. The individual may create a symbol of themselves or a symbol of the person who died, putting the two symbols together to symbolize how they cannot be totally separated from one another. And you probably want to change the word symbol to create something about themselves and something about the person who died. It could be anything. Two different colors of Play-Doh are necessary, and you can either buy them in the store or you can make homemade Play-Doh. One recipe for homemade Play-Doh would be the following. And actually, you will have access to this. So I'm not going to necessarily read through all of the ingredients and so on. But what I will say is that this recipe is no longer online. So if you want to, you could use this and it does work. Or you could also just look online and just put in Google or Yahoo or whatever, homemade Play-Doh, and it will give you some recipes that may be helpful if you want to do it on your own. But Play-Doh you can also get at in stores that is fairly reasonable. Invite the individual to use one color of the Play-Doh to create something that would represent them. This could be something they enjoy doing, a model of their body, something they like, something that they want to be. With the other color of Play-Doh, have the individual create something that would represent the person who died. Again, it could be something that the person who died enjoyed doing. a model of the person's body, something a person likes, something a person wanted to be. After the two creations have been complete, invite the individual to join the two sculptures together. In other words, smush the two colors of Play-Doh together. This might be a time when the individual says, nope, not doing it. And I know when I've had individuals say that, the first thing I recommend is let's take a picture of each one of them. So even though we're going to push them together, you have a picture of what you created. Would that work? And sometimes people say, yes, that would work. And other times people say, nope, I do not want to mush these two together. Then what I would suggest doing is taking a little bit of Play-Doh from one color, a little bit from another color, mix them all up and say, you know what? The color, the sculpture that you made about you is this color, and the sculpture you made about the person who died is this color, and now they're together. And that's what you and that person are. You're so together that you can't be separated. They're part of you, and they will be with you. It depends on the person with a disability as to how abstract you want to get about that. Or how concrete you want to be with it. It could be that you would say, they're always going to be in your heart. And so that, this is part of who you are. It's part of who they are. You could talk about how they look like the person who died, or they have same mannerisms, or they talk like that person, or whatever it might be that they're joined together. Talk about how this is like the person who died and the individual. They cannot be separated from each other because they are part of each other. Now ask the individual to create a final sculpture with the combined colors or something that they remember about the person who died. Talk again about how the new sculpture represents how, even though the person has died and is no longer present physically, they will always be part of the individual's life. The new sculpture can be placed so that the individual can see it daily. A time can be set aside each day or each week to look at the sculpture. During that time, the individual can talk about the person who died, play music, just remain silent. So this is just a visual example. It could be that the person makes a sculpture of themselves and of the person who died, and then they smush them together, and then they create something different. These are pictures from the web, so this is pretty polished coming from this, but you get the idea that now this necklace could be a combination of the two colors together. And
Mark,
then yes.
Can I just tell you one question that popped up right after you asked me?
Yes.
Emily says, I've noticed an interesting overlap in infant loss / grief symbolic rituals. And these rituals that you were describing, very interesting because different areas of grief. I would like to hear feedback on this or familiarity on this.
With infant loss?
Infant loss / grief symbolic rituals and the rituals you have stated.
Okay, I just want to clarify. Is this about an infant, or it could even be prenatal, that the baby has died and now the parents are using symbolic rituals with the grief about the infant that has died?
She says, yes, infant loss, concrete rituals in those grief books in process, death of babies, yes, symbolic rituals.
This is my sense, is that, first of all, infant loss is so challenging because not only have the parents lost the infant, but they've lost every hope that they had for that child. One ritual that I would strongly urge people to do whether it's a prenatal death or whether it's infant death, is to have a memorial or a funeral, and to do what is meaningful to the parents. I know when I've worked with funeral arrangements with funeral directors, there was one funeral director that was with an infant death, and the mother said, "I'll never be able to bring her home." And the funeral director said, "If you want to, you can." And she said, "Okay." And so they wrapped her up and they put her in a car seat and they brought her home, and they introduced her to her brother, and they had told her brother that she had died. And she showed the infant around the house and in her room and said, "This would have been your room." And then they went back, and the dad said, at the funeral, "I want to carry her casket up to the altar." And the funeral director said, "You can do whatever you need to do." And he said, I always had hope that I would walk her down the aisle one day. And this is the closest that I can get, is to bring her to the altar. So anything that can be meaningful to the family, I think, can be really healing. I don't know if I'm really answering that question very well, but the other thing is, I would say with anyone, using some of these rituals can be really helpful, even though a person may not be a concrete thinker. And with siblings of an infant who has died, to use some of the same kinds of rituals at whatever level might work for the siblings, to symbolize the death of not only the child, but also the dreams of what they all had for this child in the future. Did that answer even close?
Emily says you are when you said before. Does that make sense? And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So the directions, oops, I think I skipped all of this. Invite the individual to remember something about the person who has died and place a small stone in a water fountain, or they could also be in a stream, after they have said something that they remember. They could also paint the stone or write a word or a phrase on the stone, and then have it there. So you'd need stones and a water fountain or water of some sort. I know in the house that we used to live in, we had this wonderful fountain in the backyard, and we used to find rocks and then we'd put them in the fountain, because it was just such a beautiful space, and we could remember different spaces we had been where we found the rocks and so on. But you gather or purchase rocks. If the rocks are going to be painted or written on, you probably want to find some that are smooth, or if you can smooth them out, you can do that if they're not smooth rocks. You can also invite the individual to paint or write something on the stone they remember about the person who died. After the stone dries, and the other thing to keep in mind is if they're going to write or draw on or paint on them, they should be waterproof so that they don't put them in the fountain and everything disappears. The individual can say, or the facilitator speak for the individual who is nonverbal or unwilling, something they remember about the person who died. The individual or the facilitator can also invite others with or without disabilities to participate. And this is actually a ritual, I think, that could be used in a variety of different settings and with a variety of different people. So here we have, and as you can see, I just wrote words and symbols, but this would maybe be kind of like what it would look like, where the words and the symbols would be written on the stones in a fountain, And I love water fountains. And what I have learned is that you can get some at garage sales really, really reasonably priced. Yeah. So before we talk more about questions or comments, this is my book, and you will have access to this slide, the PowerPoint. You can, if you're interested in getting it, it's on Amazon. You could also contact Companion Press. And this is all my contact information. So if you want to, at any time, if you have a question, comment, concern, anything, you can certainly email me, or you can call. You can text. This is my cell phone. If you do text, please tell me who you are. Because sometimes I get a text that's like, I don't know where this is from. So if you do that or email me, just say who you are, just briefly who you are, and I would be happy to talk to you about it, anything that you would like to talk about. I also have a website that you might want to look at some point. So what other questions or comments before we break?
Mark, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen, if you don't mind.
I would.
And there are 2 rituals in your book that I think they're also worth mentioning. One was creating a display table of items that represent that person that had passed away, and just, putting maybe their watch, their, favorite glass vase, or a photo, and to provide a place where that can be, whether it's in the home, or like you also mentioned about putting it maybe and having it available at a funeral. Sometimes our folks don't want to go to a funeral, but they have spent the time putting something like this together, or a collage, or their artwork, as you had talked earlier. So I think that's ritual number 11. So that was one I really liked. And the other one is for people who maybe a roommate, or in a group home, and they've lost one of the residents that are their friends. And so you talked about packing luggage, because typically those rooms need to be cleared out of that person's stuff, and sometimes our folks don't want to let that stuff go. So if you just touch on that real quickly, because I think that's a big one, especially among adult population.
Well, let me just tell you a little story about 2 years ago. I was asked to talk to the residents of a group home because one of the residents had died suddenly. Actually, he had been playing card games and board games with the other residents the night before he went to sleep, and the staff found him the next morning and he had died. Well, a couple things. The staff was so grief-stricken. They were so upset, and the residents were beyond upset. They wanted to clear his room out immediately and put someone else in there, and the residents said, no, we will not let you in his room. That is his room. And so they asked if I'd come and talk to them. And so we talked about him, and just the one question that I just loved was, one of the residents said, he is my friend and I love him. Did that die too? And I said, absolutely not. People die, love never, ever dies. Well, then they also had learned right before this that the family decided not to have any kind of a ritual, no funeral, no memorial. And I said, well, would you like to have one? And they said, yes. And so we created one. And one of the residents was going to play the piano, and one was going to do some art and create the program and so on. Well, then we got to the room, and that was a big deal. I mean, they were adamant. They were like, So we came up with this idea, and it actually worked really well. was we said, you know what? He's not going to use that room anymore. And there will be somebody else coming in and living in that room. But let's do this. Let's talk to the people that own the place and see if this works. And they were happy to do it because the residents were so upset. They took his door off. Then they went into his room and they took pictures of everything that was in his room. And they pasted these pictures on this door, and they put the door in the living room area. They got a new door and they painted it a different color. They got new carpet. They painted the walls different. They took out all of the furniture that he had, and some of the residents wanted certain pieces, and they said, great. And they changed the room, and they said it was no longer his room. That door was his room, because the door was his door. And they could look at the pictures, and they had taken the pictures, which I thought was so great. And they could look at the pictures and say, yes, that is his room. Yeah, so I was just so impressed with, they came up with the whole memorial. And a couple of them had gone to memorials and funerals, and they kind of had an idea what it was and what happened there. Some had never gone, but they created it, and the staff helped, and it was beautiful. It was just beautiful.
Yep.
So
well, I love when you were talking about even packing some of their belongings in a suitcase. Yes. And allowing a person to hold on to that suitcase, let's say it's their best friend, for however long they need to.
Yes. I know when deaths happen at a school, sometimes what the school will want to do is just move the desk out, especially in an elementary, they just want to move and it's like, no, that was where that person was. That was part of who they were. And so I've suggested that too, is to ritually take out things from the desk and put them into a box or into a suitcase or into a container of some sort, then put that over on the side and the chair maybe, and then move the desk over to the side, and it's still there. And then when the students, get to the point where they don't need to have that, they'll know, and they can just start moving out the chair, the desk, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I just want to remind everybody before we go to Q&A real quick, is that this PowerPoint is going to be, this recording is going to be available for you to listen to again. Of course, we'll be doing the editing, but I would like to open up now for any other Q&A questions that are out there.
I'm not seeing anything right now. I do want to ask Mark, is there anyone in Ohio that you know of who specializes in the kind of grief and death counseling and work that you do?
I don't know of anyone.
Okay.
There is, in Minnesota, there's been more than one time where we, along with the person's parents, we've tried to find a grief group for a person with a cognitive disability. And I think there's a lot of discomfort because people don't know. And I've just said, well, let's give it a try. Let's just try this, even though it's not specifically for a person with a disability. There are none that I know of. That let's give it a try. And the grief support were too uncomfortable with it. So I don't know. I wish there were.
We do too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of crossover between grief and disabilities. As Deb was saying, I've had students, because I talk about death and dying and grief and loss, and I've had students just kind of say, I'm not going to be a funeral director. Why are you talking about this? And I think it's a process, and that our society is so death phobic that that can be really challenging.
So we have two more questions from Cynthia. Do you find that people with developmental disabilities take longer to work through the worst of the grieving process?
It's oftentimes delayed. And in fact, it's not uncommon for a person with a cognitive or developmental disability to come back from a funeral and be very happy and say, wow, I had a great time. We went out and ate. I saw my cousins. I haven't seen my cousins for so long. And sometimes that throws staff. They're like, what, you didn't care about your mother? No. Of course, that would be exciting to have attention paid to you and have all these people and so on. And it can take longer. And so it's oftentimes delayed. And then when people start grieving, like 2 months later, 3 months later, staff might say, well, now they're showing challenging behaviors. Well, of course they are. They're grieving. I had a student one time say that there was a resident where she was working and the resident's mother died and the staff didn't tell her. And I said, what? And she said she found out and she is furious. And I said, that staff has so much atoning to do. I said, of course she's furious. Anyone would be furious if you didn't tell them their mother died. And she said, well, they were wondering what to do. And I said, you better apologize. And like big time, because I said, I know you probably did that, not, thinking you were protecting her, but that was a really damaging thing to do. And that was a very hurtful thing to do to somebody.
Another question from Erica, does your book also expand on how to explore rituals with individuals that have limited expressive language due to more severe cognitive disabilities?
Most of the rituals talks about if a person is nonverbal, if a person has more challenging disabilities, that what you can do. And one of the things, for instance, and I had actually seen this in a school and I thought it was so wonderful. There was a para-professional who was working in a classroom with students that had very severe cognitive disabilities. And the one student in the class had really long hair. She used a wheelchair, she didn't talk. And every morning the para would comb her hair and then she'd put it into braids. And when she died, the student was really upset. And so the teacher said to her, I know that I'm not going to do this the same, but I'm going to comb your hair every morning. I'm going to put them your hair in braids, and I'm going to talk about the para. And that helped a lot. So I think anything that you would use with somebody who was verbal and maybe understands rituals a little bit better, you can use with somebody that is nonverbal and is low in terms of their cognitive skills. And I would always opt for inclusion rather than saying this, they don't understand. I would just say, yeah, on some level, they do understand all of this and they are grieving. And so any kind of a ritual could be really helpful to them.
Yeah, I think it's safe to, have that communication happening because, my brother was nonverbal all his life.
Yeah.
And, so but he had existed in a talking world. So, I think it's just safe to go through, find maybe an area of that person's interest. If it's tactile, if putting Legos together and talking, it's just finding something that, where they'll feel safe, but also get their attention on that thing so that communication can happen. Don't be afraid to fail.
Right. Absolutely. My perception is it's much better to fail than not do anything.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Much better. And it's scary and it's just much better.
Yeah, I just want to say something from a sibling perspective. When my daughter passed away, I chose not to have my brother at her funeral. It is okay to sometimes do that. I felt selfish, but I had to, because what would happen when he was around me, the sibling part of me would kick in and I'd worry about where he was. his behaviors, those kind of things. So, but I think we also, like you were saying just a few minutes ago about inclusion, to offer that opportunity, if you think that they could go to a memorial service, or you don't want them to feel left out. So it might be that little table of items,
Right.
or a drawing or a song, play their favorite song at a funeral. So with that, it's 8 o'clock, and I do want to share this before I thank Mark for his time, that we are going to have a part 2 of In Loving Memory, and it is called Loss and Remembrance. And I'm just going to read a little description if I can find it real quick. So I'd be working with Barbara Safaris, who is also a sibling. Both of us are older, and both of our brothers have passed away. But we've been in the disability community for years, and we've been to memorial services. We've participated in different types of rituals, and so we want to, and we know loss looks different to other people. It could be the loss of a job. It could be a loss, your friend moved out of town, but for the sake of these, we're talking about the loss of a person, or it could be, a pet kind of thing. But, we're going to just talk about some things that come into play when preparing a funeral, such as the family perspective, cultural or spiritual influences. We both agree that it's great, since we're talking about a trajectory, sometimes we can plan a funeral, a service, or we can prepare someone when we know someone is extremely ill. So there's things that we can do in preparation. Granted, there are times we don't have time to prepare. So I want to invite anybody listening on March 9th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. We will be hosting this, and just look on our Facebook page for the Center for Disability Empowerment Facebook page for the upcoming events that we offer. Also, you might want to look at our YouTube channel to see what other webinars we have produced in the past. So Mark, I want to thank you so much for who you are, my new friend, and
Yes.
just being around. It's a topic no one wants to talk about, but we need to
Absolutely.
talk about it. And so I would love to keep these conversations going. And some of you may not know this, but I'm trying to encourage Mark to consider doing a child book.
Yes.
And that would be kind of a fun little project as well.
I
But
would love to.
so
Yeah,
thank you.
I will think about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna hound you on it,
The
because
hound bee is a good thing.
there's such a need.
Yes.
And I have shared with my husband that I feel led to possibly lead a type of support group that may use some of your rituals, where someone can come if they like art, then that particular time will be just on art, and maybe have an art therapist be there to help learn how to be with this population and practice their skills, if you will, because we have nothing.
Right.
I've led Grief Share. Grief Share is not interested in having curriculum geared for people with developmental disability. So I'm not waiting for them. So who knows where that's going to take me. But anyway, thank you all for joining us. This was wonderful, Mark. Thank you for your passion, for your story, being led by the loss of your father. And to me, his life is continuing, and the passion. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you. This is great.